Hello everyone, my name is the Mad Scorpion, and I had a bit of a topic discussion that I feel like is an appropriate one, given the recent episode, as well as just some of the other kind of release patterns we've been seeing. In the terms of episodes, as much as they may not be seasons, and this is of course the last episode, and we're going to be going back to another 4 seasons a year sort of pattern, I just really hope that Bungie picks a speed in general when it comes to their release platform, which may be impartial faults of the community, because the community requests things or gives feedback, and then Bungie also, at their own fault, easily responds in some ways. So to go over the timeline, at least in terms of releases, in the many seasons that predated the episodes in the final shape, the seasons were a constant, usually 8-week seasons that would have week by week releases until the 8th week. That ends, and we would usually have, I'd say, a storyless section of the season where it's time to grind, do raids, do any activity that isn't the seasonal story, and usually by the last 2-3 weeks or so, we might have an epilogue event that would then transition into the next season, which then that season would then, of course, pick up this pattern of 8 weeks of story, week by week releasing, and then a usual 8-week-ish long time where there is no story that eventually is either an epilogue or it just goes right into the next season. So with that, when it came to the episodes, it kind of was like that at the start, because with the acts, the season was broken up a little bit, so we had Act 1, 2, and 3 to go through. And with the first episode of Echoes, which I personally think was the most perfect of them all, we had 3 weeks of Act 1, 3 weeks of no act releasing, then we had 3 weeks of Act 2, another 3 weeks of no act releasing, and then the 3 weeks of Act 3, and then the kind of settle down period at the end of that, and immediately after those 3 weeks ended, next thing you know, Revenant is picking up. Which, unfortunately at this point, people had voiced their opinions, and it seemed like the general consensus, or at least what Bungie had picked up, was that people didn't like the release schedule. It felt like there wasn't a lot happening, or there was too many gaps and breaks, which honestly, in the pure perspective of a Destiny gamer, like if I only played Destiny, I do 100% get it, because it was weird going 3 on, 3 off constantly, but at the same time, I felt like that perfect 3 on, 3 off was a good way for a Destiny player to be involved with the story, do their Destiny for the 3 weeks that the story is happening, and then for the next 3 weeks, there may be events, there may be trials, but aside from a maybe small pop-up, there was no reason to go back to Destiny. I could start playing other games, get into other games, to branch out, and refresh my want, play something that isn't a looter shooter to refresh the kind of, I'd say, cooldown on wanting to grind out looter shooters again. Like, in this case, I would have gone and played Helldivers for some time, and recently I picked up Monster Hunter, and it's been quite refreshing playing something that isn't essentially a looter shooter, even if Monster Hunter may be a looter slasher in essentiality. But in regards to that, once Revenant started, the first act was very similar, I believe, to Echoes, in that it was 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. But then after Bungie accepted the feedback and adjusted some things, once Act 2 happened, Act 2 released in full, if memory serves completely correctly. Literally, as soon as Act 2 happened, it was completely out and it was gone, so you had everything happen in the first week of Act 2, but then you had 5 weeks of nothing else happening, because they kept the same scheduled cycle, but they just changed how things releases. And from that point, then that's where the flaws really appeared, because they also did this other thing with the acts, and that is essentially rip out a lot of the busy work. As there wasn't going to be so many weeks, you might as well shorten it so it isn't just do a mission, grind out seasonal activity. Do a mission, grind out even more seasonal activity. Do another mission, grind out a lot of seasonal activity, and a separate odd step. Because that's usually how it would go when it came to Echoes. You would do a mission, you maybe play grind executable, breach executable, that one, maybe have to do a round of Enigma Protocol, and then you would have the story for that week. And usually by that time, the week was over. You'd maybe spend 3-ish hours total if you had to do the variety steps. But then with Revenant, they usually pretty much essentially, or not usually, they essentially ripped out the busy work when it came to that. So a lot of times, at least in terms of the Act 2 missions, you dropped in, did a mission, talked to characters 1, 2, or 3, and there was a lot of talking to some characters sometimes with no middle space in between. And from there, you might do another mission, but then pretty much that might have been the end. As people were noting, you could complete an entire act in almost an hour and a half of story and maybe only have 3 actual events. The rest of it was just listening to dialogue. And then the third act of Revenant happened in a very similar fashion. Once it released, everything was released all at once, and then we had the maybe 5, 6, however longest weeks between then the final episode of Heresy would release, and they messed with Heresy's release a little bit more, and they kind of did what, at least what they thought, I think, was a middle ground, where Heresy Act 1 happened, and it was 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off in a very similar fashion, where 3 weeks of story, and then 3 weeks of just happenings of Destiny that didn't have story releases. When Act 2 released, it's still going the week by week, but Act 2, as some people may have noticed, is literally the 3 weeks on, and then there's nothing else because Act 3 immediately follows up behind it, which at this point, Act 3 has not released, so I don't know of the official release schedule they are going with for that. But if you've played Act 2 of Heresy, you might know that if you were caught up and you got to Act 3, or Act 2, Week 3, I should say, essentially, once you logged on, you talked to a character, which I don't even think you talked to. You went straight into a mission on the Dreadnought. You did a small mission that was some waves of enemies, but then did a little bit small hive puzzle. Then at that point, it was done. You then talked to Eris, you talked to Sloane, you listened to some dialogue, maybe talked to that one drifter talisman that was in Eris's apartment. But from that point, guess what? Act 2 complete, the big finale. It is all over already. It was literally effectively listening to dialogue, 10 minutes long in terms of the activity, less than 5 minutes long, I feel like. So I really just think that Bungie needs to pick a speed, because officially, I have a feeling this would have been a lot longer, but the combination of the shrunken and adjusted release schedule, as well as the fact that they ripped out busy work, because I imagine we would have been doing a lot more Court of Blades right now if they didn't rip out the between busy work, would have maybe been a 2-hour long act run through, but because of the loss of busy work, not to mention the compressed release schedule, the official Act 2 finale, that usually is a lot more grand, especially in comparison to Act 1's finale, yeah, essentially, it was 5 minutes, and then it was over, Act 2 is done, and we are now waiting for next week. So, 100%, this, of course, this is criticism of the episodes, but I couldn't help but feel like this may be a new path for Bungie in their seasonal content, because I was perfectly fine with 8 weeks long of weekly stories, because that gave me a reason to keep coming back to Destiny. If suddenly they go, oh, we're doing weekly releases, but guess what, we're gonna have 3 weeks in 1 week, 2 weeks in 1 week, and then 4 weeks across 6 weeks, and they start just teasing it and messing with it individually based on how people are receiving it, I feel like at that point, it's just going to get muddied water, and we're just going to have too many different scenarios of, this week was 3 hours long of work, this week may have been 5 hours of work because we had to go do something, this week this was a lunch break, and we literally ate a sandwich in the same amount of time that it took to finish this week's story. I just really hope that Bungie, like I said, can learn to pick a speed. Because as much as feedback is important, and responding to the feedback is obviously important, I feel like they need to also be a little bit steadfast and say, well, at least in the case of episodes, this is only staying around for so long, so we don't need to mess with it that much. And in terms of the seasonal, hopefully, they don't let what happened with the episodes affect what happens in future seasons. Because at that point, then it is definitely going to feel like there are some weeks that we just have barely anything to do if we are only here for the seasonal story, which is definitely that boat I am in right now. Because at this point, I haven't touched Guardian Games a little bit. I haven't raided since Heresy launched. I haven't done any Grandmasters. I think I tried to do a dungeon or two, but it wasn't the new one. It wasn't Sunder Doctrine. And from that point, then, that's how I'm going to leave it. I just really hope that Bungie understands that being adamant and keeping consistent with some things is definitely good in some cases. Because like I said, messing with the timelines has made some of the events been what should have been much more grand, a lot more lackluster. With that is all I'm saying for now. My name is Scorpion. If you enjoyed this video or have any sort of comments on your own, they're of course always welcome in the comments section down below. I always welcome a good conversation. And with that, I will see you in the next video.